Let's bring you more now on the news that 8 people have died while trying to cross the English Channel. Well, we're also hearing now from the government that just yesterday, on the 14th of September, 801 people crossed in 14 boats crossed the channel, that is. So that's 801 in the previous 5 days. No people crossed. On the 8th of September, 6 days ago, it was 55. So a significant increase just yesterday. And today we've seen the deaths of 8 people in the channel. Well, joining me now to discuss this all is the chair of the Maritime Search and Rescue Council, Matthew Shank. Thanks for joining us to speak to us about this. Is enough being done? And I guess it's a matter of perspective, isn't it? Whether to stop people crossing the channel or indeed to save their lives.
Yes, good afternoon. And you're exactly right. The approach that's been taken by the previous government and the current government is the approach of smash the criminal gangs. And, you know, whilst I agree that the criminal element of this needs to be addressed, there is a serious humanitarian issue that is continuing to worsen. We're up to 45 people who have lost their lives already this year, and that needs to be the priority.
And if that is not, as you say, the priority, the government, I guess, would say that it is, and therefore they're trying to smash the gangs that are putting these people at risk. I'm not here to speak for the government, but just so our viewers understand the roundedness of it. What should be done then that isn't being done now to make this a humanitarian issue?
Sure, we look at the smashing of the criminal gangs. That's going to take time. That is a long-term issue that is going to take years to achieve. In the very short term, we are dealing with large numbers of people crossing the channel, and every single person who gets into one of these poorly constructed, overloaded boats is at risk of losing their life. In the short term, we need to take action to address that. Most of these disasters have happened in French territorial waters, and my concern is when we look to the UK side, we are woefully unprepared to carry out an emergency response. The only way that I can sort of compare this to, if we look at the drug and syringe exchange program that exists for people who use drugs, that helps keep people safe. But when we look at the approach to the channel, there is no mechanism to provide, for instance, people life jackets. If they're going to make these crossings, we need to make sure that they are protected and safe, and that's something that I think needs to be seriously looked at. Otherwise, we are going to continue to see more loss of life.
Well, wouldn't that be seen then as encouraging? Wouldn't that be seen then as encouraging people to make these dangerous crossings, or facilitating?
My response to that is sure. And my response to that is, if we look at the needle exchange program, as I said there, are we not encouraging drug use? No, of course we're not. People are going to use drugs, and we need to make sure that they are safe if they choose to do that. When we look to the channel, by providing people with a life jacket to save their life if something happens, that should be our priority. The smashing of the criminal gangs is also a priority that needs to happen sooner rather than later. But if we're not going to be able to achieve that in the short term, we cannot stand by and continue to let loss of life happen. When we look to the emergency response side within the English Channel, it's primarily carried out either by a charity or by Border Force. You know, the HM Coast Guard has a statutory function to respond to maritime search and rescue incidents, and it is only a matter of time before we have another tragedy in the UK side, and we're not prepared for that because we don't have the right vessels, we don't have the right teams to respond to that.
I mean, that's extraordinary, with or without the migrant issue, isn't it? That the Coast Guards don't have their own vessels?
Absolutely. We're one of the very, very few Coast Guards in Europe that don't have a vessel. Again, the only way I can describe it is it's like asking the police to respond to a fire and put a fire out in a house. We're asking Border Force to commit resources and assets to carry out search and rescue functions that in reality sit with HM Coast Guard, but they don't have the assets to do it. So then they rely on a charity which is completely overwhelmed and struggling to respond as well. It puts us in a pretty precarious position as we go into winter with the loss of life we've already seen. These boats are getting more overloaded.
I want to talk to you about winter in a moment. I just want to get your thoughts on the breaking news that we've got this afternoon, just as we were coming to you, actually, that 801 people, not a record, but 801 people crossed the channel in one day on just 14 boats.
So that says to me, as a emergency response professional, that is 14 potential mass casualty events that have been averted. You know, it's only luck that we haven't had more loss of life and more tragedies, and we need to make sure that we are prepared. And we're not prepared because we have a focus on the long-term criminal gang smashing and not the short-term issue, which is a significant risk to life that exists.
And you mentioned the winter approaching. I mean, it is incredibly, obviously, cold. The water will be cold, but the seas tend to be more rough, right? So perhaps crossings will perhaps go down, or is that not what you are concerned about?
Sure, when the weather picks up, we do tend to see a reduction in crossings. However, because of the pressures that are potentially being put on the gangs in France, we do tend to see that they will take risks in worse weather, and also by putting more people on boats. So this is why I think we're seeing a rise in the number of loss of lives that we've seen this year. And as we approach winter, I will be worried when looking back to a few years ago where we wouldn't see vessels crossing in certain weather conditions that we are now starting to see.
All right. I'm interested to know, and I know politics is not your thing, but search and rescue very much is, and having been the chairperson, what are the conversations like behind the scenes amongst Coast Guards, RNLI? Is the sentiment that, look, we want to try and help these people and stop these deaths from happening, and the government's not doing enough on other aspects, and as you say, focusing on the wrong thing, not the humanitarian aspect, but what about, what are the thoughts on, you know, safe routes to cross?
Absolutely. If we want to look at you know, the root cause of why people are getting into a boat and crossing the channel, it's because there is no safe and legal routes for people to do this. I can tell you for nothing that if we declared safe and legal routes for people, the boats would stop tonight. But because of the politics, we're not able, they're not willing to do that. So we have to look at the fact that the approach being taken is to go for the criminal gangs. But that still leaves us with the humanitarian side. Now, I would like to think that there are those discussions happening in the background, but for me, as an expert in this field, I have yet to see anything of substance when we look at the emergency response framework within the channel from the UK side. I really haven't seen a change prior to this crisis starting in 2018 to where we are now, other than a load more border force vessels which are completely unsuitable for search and rescue.
Interesting. What are the conversations like? Does the government engage with people like you as the chairperson of the Maritime Search and Rescue Council? Are they engaging enough with the people on the ground to find out what's going on and what to do about this?
Unfortunately, from my experiences, I met with Louise Haigh in January this year to discuss my concerns about the emergency response and the concerns of the council. This is because the general election was obviously going to be happening at some point this year, so we wanted to have that early engagement to make sure this was at the top of their priorities. Since that meeting in January, despite numerous emails and conversations that we've tried to have, we've had nothing, and that includes from the Home Secretary as well. It's very concerning for us, given that we have workable policy, that we've prepared, that we're able to work with the government to deliver, to protect people, but we have seen a lack of engagement from them, which is very disappointing.